Good morning or afternoon to you, depending on where you're at. I'm Clint Skutcon with T360's Organized Real Estate Division, Senior Vice President, overseeing our work with associations and MLSs. And Liz, I'll turn it over to you as well, as we get to do lots of fun work together.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. Liz Tewksbury here with T360. Definitely the afternoon over here where I am in sunny New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's funny. We get to work there. We're like many who do the remote office environment where someone's either 2 hours ahead or behind at all times. It's fun to know where you're at in your day. I like getting those 4 o'clock in the morning emails for me, which are only 6 o'clock in the morning for you. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think we promoted this as a webinar here that's going to focus in on consolidation as it relates to the organized real estate space. But I think one of the things that we want to really get out of the gate here to really bring into the forefront is that consolidation brings with it a lot of preconceived ideas, in particular in the organized real estate space, a lot of fears, fear around money, control, all those things, and so. I think we should stop talking about this in general as consolidation, and rather reorient ourselves towards regionalization. And this has been occurring, as we'll outline later in the presentation, since really the 80s, since our marketplaces and our industry has become more and more regionalized. And so to me, it's not as scary when you start to think about it that our marketplaces were once very local, hyper local in many instances, but now have become far more regionalized in nature. And so we need to understand kind of what's going on, in the marketplace as a whole, what, communities and other industries are doing at large to address the changing environment that we all operate in and that is far more regionalized. So we're going to give you some realities and go through that. Before we do, just for those who are maybe looking at or considering, the idea of how do we evolve, especially as the industry is seeing some big changes, at a minimum being discussed, if not coming our way shortly. We do a number of different services here at T360, but a lot of it starts with what we're doing here today, which is education, speaking, just getting you information based on all the research we get access to. But that next step where we can help you and we don't have to fully engage is really just in terms of some evaluation and assessment. Where are you at, and what's working, what's not, and what are the options based on those realities. So just keep in mind, we love engaging with you. And if you do want to get to the consulting or even the having us help you to manage change or going through some sort of consolidation or regionalization work, we can certainly help with that. But it all starts with getting educated and having a conversation, which we're willing to do at any time. Sharing back some of the realities. I know many, especially that are in the organized real estate space, that are decision makers for MLSs and associations, are probably becoming more and more aware of this as we've shared back this data through our partnership with RESO over the last number of years. But these are the number of organizations that we're tracking. And today we're tracking 519 MLSs around the country. Realistically, there wasn't much clarity around the number of MLSs in particular, even as late as 2015. Because it just wasn't being tracked and talked about. And it's also a complex environment, whereas we track MLS organizations, the folks at RESO and other more tech specific entities track the number of MLS systems themselves. So we work more at an organizational capacity. That's what we'll be talking about today. And so we see a total of 519 MLSs around the country. 412 of those are what we would call a local MLS. That's an association owned, managed, and operated MLS that serves primarily a singular marketplace, whereas a regional MLS is either made up of multiple stakeholders. And by the way, those stakeholders can be associations, brokerage, whatever it might be in terms of those who are shareholders or stakeholders in that organization. And in many instances, there are regional MLSs that serve a region, but may only have a single owner. HAR is one of the biggest ones and most recognized down in the Houston area. Certainly regional in its service, even if its ownership isn't necessarily structured around multiple shareholders. So just something to keep in mind. One of the big fears that's out there, especially amongst association leaders, is without our MLS, we would die. For me, I came from an association that had been separated for over 20 years. I can assure you we weren't dying. In fact, we were thriving because we were very clear about what our charge was and what our value proposition was. And the MLS was very clear about that too. And now there are over 61% of all associations in the country that are actually served by a regional MLS. So they don't directly run or oversee or direct their MLS, and they're still in existence, as it turns out. This shows some of the change that's occurred over the last 5 years as we've been tracking these numbers. And assuredly, what we are seeing is a change in terms of the number of associations and MLSs. The number of organizations is going down, as you can see here, both from association and MLS. But in turn, you're seeing that those who are served by each of those individual ones is also going up. So there are fewer organizations serving more people. What I would say has really occurred, though, over the last 5 years versus what we saw prior to that, which was largely regionalization through consolidation, is that over the last 5 years, we've been seeing what we would call absorption. It may seem like a little bit of a turn of terms here, but in reality, what we've largely seen are small entities who have, outside of a protracted, let's put your organization together with ours and create something new, smaller entities saying, we don't have the scale, the resources, whatever it might be, to deliver the technology, the data that's required to service today's marketplace. So what we're showing here is that we had 626 MLSs that we were tracking when we started this effort back in 2018. We're down to 522 overall. What you see in the middle is the average size. The average size MLS is right around 3.5K or 3,500. Those numbers have been going down. Those who are actually below that number. So the smaller entities are choosing to join the larger entities. And as you can see here, the larger entities have gone from 79 up to 100. Or if you run the percentages on this, essentially it was a 90-10 split just 5 years ago. 90% were under 3,500, 10% were over that. Now, just 5 years later, we're at an 80-20 split on that. So quickly we're coming together. And a lot of that has been, as we pointed out, from smaller organizations joining larger. But why we're here today is because in the last 6 months, we've been hearing much more conversation about the actual regionalization through like-sized, similar entities, whether they're associations or MLSs, coming together to talk to each other. So within the context of those MLSs overall, we have a spectrum from mega MLSs down to the micro MLSs. And this is where the pain point, I think, is for the industry at large, and where we hear a lot about the need for consolidation is because of those 519 MLSs. Most see them as a grouped type of understanding of what MLSs are, but realistically, the micro MLSs, those who are under 400 in terms of subscriber counts, are 43% of all the organizations. Another 20%, or close to approximately 2/3 of all MLSs in the country, are below that 1,000 mark. As you can see over to what is my left, likely your right, 50% of all subscribers are served by just 3.7% of all MLSs, or 20 of those. 75 MLSs serve 80% of all subscribers. And if we think about not only the size, but the type, regional MLSs, at the beginning of 2023, we're serving 1.49 million, almost 1.5 million subscribers, whereas local association-owned and directed MLSs were serving a total of 383. And you can see here, we talked about the amalgamated average size being over 3,500. But if you look at the specifics, regional MLSs, their average is 13,000 and their median is 7,000. Whereas the median for a local MLS is just 335 and the average is 910. So there's a significant difference here as regionalization drives different sized organizations. How that looks across the country, these are the number of MLSs by state. And when you look at it in this map, you can see here, Texas has the largest number of MLS organizations. Excuse me. And a few folks up in the Northeast are down to just one serving a statewide. And then, of course, MLS's number in between throughout the U.S. That looks fairly okay. Well, that makes some sense. But if we start to look at it and see what it looks like, this is a bit of the chaos. And not only are there these number of organizations, there's all sorts of different MLS systems out there, as we know. So this looks a little chaotic. But then from the consumer and the practitioner standpoint, this is actually what it feels like on the ground. This is overlapping listings. So if more than 3 listings show up in any given geography, it lights up here. And so you can see where we have a lot of overlap, or what we call overlapping market disorder, which has largely been a driving force for consolidation or regionalization in the past, is to do away with the compulsion to have to be a part of more than one MLS in order to do business and to see the marketplace the way the consumers do through portals. So as we break that down, what we see here is this is an association to MLS ratio by state. So further kind of break this down, there's only one state in the union, South Dakota, that doesn't yet have a regionalized MLS. They're the only one here where you can see it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So in other words, for every association, there's one MLS. And so these numbers, the larger the number, the more there's a regional provision occurring in their state. And so the one with the largest is our friends in Maryland, who are served statewide by Bright MLS. The Northeast also has a few folks that have state level services as well. Excuse me. So in terms of subscriber to realtor ratios, so we do realtor counts and subscriber counts. This starts to demonstrate the impact in terms of the number of subscriptions that occur beyond those who are able to join one MLS. I do want to provide a caveat to that. There are a number of states that allow for MLS access without being a realtor member. So there are states in here that, of course, there are more subscribers than realtors because they don't have to be a realtor to join the state. A bit of a canary in the coal mine with some of the industry scale conversations that are being had here in the last few weeks related to potential settlement related activities that brokerages are agreeing to, whether or not they continue that realtor membership as a compulsion. And then what kind of impact does that have on MLSs that currently have, you must be a realtor in order to join the MLS, especially when there are court rulings, the Thompson rulings, that have said you can't require realtor membership in order to be an MLS subscriber. So a bit of interest coming there. But overall, what we're seeing is that there's about a 20% difference over the last 7 years. So in other words, 1 in 5 is paying to be a part of more than one MLS. Our estimation is that equals just shy of $170 million in fees annually. Where does that come from? We've recently done some work around gross revenue estimations for all MLSs. We did this earlier in the year where there was 522 MLSs. What you can see here is that we show the average MLS brings in 1.7 million. But again, because there's significant differentiation in size, the median amount of revenue is just 345,000. So this becomes a part of the story where we've seen a lot of that absorption, where 345,000 is not a lot to run a technology and data related company. So we've seen some of the absorption occur because of this a lack of revenue. Of course, when you talk about regionalization, scale is something that's brought in, cost savings, efficiency, all those things. We're actually able to demonstrate that here through our average per subscriber revenue. This is all revenue combined, although we know in general across the vast majority of MLSs, 90+% of their revenue is generated from fees, but this does account for other revenue streams. And you can see that the megas are bringing in just about $500 per subscriber, whereas the smalls are nearly 700. So there is a difference here. There is efficiency gains related to regionalization. And we can further demonstrate this through the compensation piece as well. If we look here, we asked for ranges of revenue. So that's why there's 2 different ranges. There's a high end and a low end. And what you can see is the average compensation percentage that we're paying back to the executives, very different in the mega or 10,000 or larger MLS environment than they are in the micro 400 and under, where just around 6 to 3% is being spent on the executive in those larger organizations, and almost 50% on the high end is being spent on that micro side of the equation. 41% or on the low end, a third is going towards their executive salary. That doesn't even include any other staffing. So again, another demonstration of how there is efficiency gains when you have more regionalized organizations with larger footprints and revenue. Quickly, and we're going to get to kind of how this all relates to the regionalization, but I think there's some backdrops here in terms of movements or trends that we're seeing. The compensation shifts, as we already talked about earlier, Liz, we didn't hear a lot about, you and I getting contacts of, hey, we're talking to this organization or that organization until about, I say 6 months, but it really is intensified in the last 3 or 4 months, it seems like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's coming from a few different thoughts. The compensation piece for sure, but also the feeling from that I'm getting from some of the MLSs that we're talking to is that if we don't start considering moving into a regionalization approach, at some point, somebody else that's larger than each of these individual entities that are making the consideration, they're going to roll in here, and then we're not going to have a voice in the conversation moving forward.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Yeah, and those two coupled have really created some energy. Again, we did a webinar on, the lawsuits, the potential outcomes, the settlements, all that, and how it really impacts to organized real estate. And of course, it really gets back to the revenue piece, because we are so headcount model driven that, participant and subscriber dues or membership fees are really the primary revenue driver. And so there's an emerging need to either grow your pool or to be able to diversify your revenue. And when you diversify your revenue, as we highlighted in that in the webinar previously, is data becomes this immediate other opportunity, in particular for MLSs, to diversify their revenue. And what we know is the larger the pool, the more accurate, the more timely that the pool of data is, ultimately the more value it's going to hold. And so as we start to look at monetization strategies that both support and benefit the industry while generating revenue for the MLS, the reality is that the larger those sets of data are, the more opportunity there is to ultimately offset this dependency on the dues model. And so we're seeing a lot of that. We also know that the advocacy and professionalism related activities, as our markets are growing together and there's more cross-market professionalism and advocacy related items, is growing. So this is adding value to broadening your footprint and understanding how those marketplaces interconnect and interwork with each other, whether an MLS or an association. And that leads to, this doubling down or even quadrupling down, if you will, on cooperation, where, both MLSs and associations really need to lean into this cooperative nature of our business that produces, not only competition, but cooperation, or as we would call it, co-opetition, that drives benefits for, practitioners as well as consumers. So big background on that. We highlighted in our last one, we've got a readiness checklist that we're putting together for MLSs and associations to run against the potential outcomes of these lawsuits. These are the categories. But what I would say is, not only are you doing this, in terms of how ready are you for any sort of changes to the commission and compensation structure in the industry, but how ready are you, or how much do you need to be thinking about creating scale while retaining local voice, like Liz just pointed out. So those pieces are in there. This is the other factor, and we've talked about this many times with our clients and others around the country. MLS compilation. What this is remember the old compilation albums where you put all the greatest hits together for just one low cost, a penny or 99 cents if you were me, when there was the tape of the month club. But you get all these great things for one low price. And we think that's a lot of what's happening in the industry. And Liz, I know I share this a lot, and you've been sitting alongside me. So you can kind of cheat sheet here. What is this?
So this is a heat map that shows light emissions. And when we think about light emissions, it's really just a natural marketplace, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it represents not only activity and people and stuff, but it represents a lot of real estate, whether that be commercial or residential. And so it does. We think it's like a great track and a visualization to see how our market areas, as we've dealt with affordability issues and people are, the old drive till you qualify, it's being demonstrated. NAR data shows that you drive till you qualify. Going into the pandemic in 2018 was about a 15-mile radius. Now it's as much as 50. And so we now see communities growing together even more so and being more interconnected than they were before. And these communities that are emerging as natural marketplaces don't always match up with our real estate assigned service areas that were given to us through the charter. So, a lot of times folks ask us, well, how many MLSs should there be? And it's an interesting question. The easy default is, well, one per state, right? Because you're licensed at the state level. And licensure is certainly a part of the marketplace, but also so too is the connectivity. And as we just talked about, the natural marketplaces that are related to all the things that go into it. So I asked the question, what is this? And this is a recent kind of way for us to demonstrate not just, real estate marketplaces, but communities. And we still need to be attached back into communities. And so what this is if you're used to or familiar with census data that shows metropolitan service areas or micropolitan service areas, this is what's called a combined statistical area. And these are larger regions that encompass multiple nearby cities and surrounding areas that are economically and socially interconnected. Sounds a lot like a marketplace, right? And a community, and therein likely a real estate marketplace. There are 170 around the country. And so we're starting to see where, if we're going to try and organize and truly produce regionalized services that add value at a local scale, but reflect also the importance at a national scale, we think this is a good way to think about it. And even further thinking about that, we're thinking not only is it about communities, but we're talking about the flow of data and how important it is that it's interconnected. So this is another one of those opportunities. What is it? Liz, I think you know the cheat sheet answer on this one as well, right?
Yes, fiber optic networks. Yes.
I believe data is transferred on those, right?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I understood as well. So this is the fiber optics and the way in which, north and south, east and west connectivity occurs in a data environment. And, one of our lifebloods, as we're talking about, is the real estate data that we possess, and how can we make it more interconnected and valuable. And so what's funny is if you lay those service areas, the combined service areas we just talked about, look at the linkage here. And so we can take what is now somewhat chaotic with the 519 and even getting it down to 170 who might be interconnected. We could actually enhance and create a much more efficient marketplace without necessarily just having to cut down to an artificial number of, we only need 20 MLSs or we only need 30, whatever it might be. But we think this is a great way for our industry to start to think about, again, the idea of regionalization, not consolidation. And to further, outline this and how it should be considered for our MLS and association leaders, this is the top 20 MLSs that serve 50% of subscribers around the country. Look how it lays over the top of those light emissions pieces. And so from that, we've seen all sorts of collaboration and collaboration networks being formed. In fact, between the various collaboration networks that we're tracking right now, we just passed 1 million subscribers that are represented by RE Distribute, MLS Grid, MLS Aligned, some data sharing services, the Common Data Platform, and some folks that are in multiples of these. But what's happening is we're seeing folks, again, collaborate to compete. And so for those that aren't quite yet participating in any of these, we would say to you, you need to think about, in terms of especially of your regionalization strategy, do you want to participate in one of these? If not, that's fine too. But if you're not wanting to participate, you need to start to get ready to position against this. And so again, then broader marketplaces, regionalized marketplaces help you to retain that independence. But it also, if you do want to participate, gives you the likelihood of becoming more than just a participant and actually to become a stakeholder. And there's definitely a difference in terms of just participating in one of these networks versus being a stakeholder in it. And I can assure you, if you're out there and you're living on your own island at a localized scale, none of these folks are really going to be that interested in your perspective. So regionalization plays into this as well. And these are some of the folks that we see as up next in particular. They're not currently participating in this, but if they did, it would bump us up to nearly 1.4 million subscribers being served by one of these collaboration networks. So all this is a backdrop for your regionalization considerations. And so we want to jump into this now. And just a slight bit of history and a shout out. I was brought into T360 by Kevin McQueen, who worked with Ann Bailey and David Sharon and a lot of these folks that did a lot of work that has gone into the best practices in thinking about regionalization and consolidation and mergers. And a lot of this dates back to the 1980s, which again is really about the time that we started to see regionalization amongst the brokerages. Of course, the internet drove a lot of regionalization. And so now we have those 107 regional MLSs. And many of those were formed in the last decade. There are 636 associations, as we talked about, that are being served by a regional MLS. That's nearly 5.9 associations per regional MLS. And to further exacerbate this, the top 25 MLSs are all regionalized already. They serve a total of 280 associations between them. That's 44% of all those who are receiving regional MLS services. And their average is 11.2 associations per MLS. So if scale, scope, and connectivity amongst regional marketplaces matters, this is where these folks are succeeding. Arizona Regional goes back to the 1980s. You can, of course, recognize California Regional, largest MLS in the country, started really regionalizing it back in 2010. Indiana Regional, 2012. Bright MLS on the East Coast, second largest MLS in the country. Formed in 2017, serves 44 plus associations. Smart MLS, Palm Beaches in Florida, Beaches MLS, 2018. You can see the most of this activity occurred before 2018, but now it's coming back around. And we have, a few here highlighted that have even gotten to that state level in terms of their consolidation. And Liz, you were a part of this, in that you came from Prime MLS. And talk to me a little bit about your experience about, getting not only to a regional scale, but to a statewide scale, and what took place there, and maybe what lessons were learned, because we think the regionalization conversations and the types of organizations that are going to form moving forward are a little bit different than maybe what the consolidation, activities looked like back then.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at the list, every state in New England is represented on it as having a statewide MLS. And it's because New England, is in some senses the same size as some states that are out there. I can probably get where I am here in New Hampshire to every state quicker than you can get across, the great state of Colorado. So I think that it was sort of a natural progression for us to lead here in New England in terms of statewide MLS. But if we really just stop and we think about it, the concept really started with Better Together, which has been sort of a common theme. And, and I also think we really took a step back and said, if we were to build organized real estate, specifically MLS, from the ground up today, as if it didn't existed, would we ever have 522 MLSs in our country? And I think saying no to that was a very simple idea. So, even where I am right here in New Hampshire, I can access, I want to say 14 local associations within an hour's drive. And imagine being a practitioner in this area and having to be part of an MLS for, join an MLS for every single one of those organizations just to be able to enter in a listing. It just doesn't make sense. And I think it did way back. And I think that's one of the things that we recognized here in New England was way back when MLS was just a book with, an agreement to cooperate and share compensation. All of these local MLSs really did make a lot of sense. But if you really wanted to be forward thinking, not only from a technology, but an innovation standpoint, it really just simply made sense to put the pride and the ego of your individual association aside and move forward with doing what made sense most for agents, which was to become a statewide MLS, which is what New Hampshire did, and then eventually ended up bringing Vermont into the mix. So it's actually a regional MLS that handles 2 entire states, and you don't really see a whole lot of that. But you're also seeing these statewide and these regional MLSs have more opportunity to really evolve their tech stack and also to start to invest in different MLS initiatives, not only the redistributes, et cetera, that you spoke to, but also in other technology companies. So we're seeing MLSs, build their own systems and build their own showing services and build their own statistical, stats programs. And, a local association just simply wouldn't have the ability to do that. So that's where that Better Together philosophy really, in my opinion, comes from. And it's what we focused on here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I think that the Better Together came from largely an association mindset, because they were association run local MLSs. And so when they started putting those together, they applied association governance structures to make it happen. Everybody needs a representative and all these things. But I think in today's environment, there's more thought around when regionalization occurs. It needs to be staged in a way that facilitates, as you point out, a more innovative, technology forward company. And that doesn't always equate to representation. And in fact, sometimes it's the opposite of that. Smaller, more strategic, more expert oriented advisory boards rather than just representative boards that are focused on administrative activities. So I think this is a big shift that we're going to see now as we are hearing more regionalization occurring, is that the conversations moving forward are going to be more like what Liz outlined. Is we're going to start from that position of if we started from scratch today, what would it look like versus, well, this is what we knew in the past, so let's bring it all forward and cram it together. And even if on the other side of this, it's not necessarily better, at least we got it put together. I think now regionalization, whether that comes through consolidation or collaboration, has to mean it's better, not equal to or less than, just so that it's bigger. Scale is great, but I think capabilities are even more important. Again, shout out to Kevin McQueen and the hard work that he put in and leveraging, like I said, some of those folks that even came before him. We have our T3 workbook on MLS consolidation. It's a roadmap created back in 2018, but still very, very relevant to the process itself. And Liz and I are, involved in a couple of these right now. So there are options in front of you when you start to think about regionalization, but this one really probably not one of those. Status quo. Like I said, if you're sitting there and not thinking about how you're going to participate in collaboratives or regionalization or positioning against it, somebody's going to show up at the door with an answer for you soon, or they're just going to simply come and compete with you directly. And at this point, we can't feign ignorance to the idea that our marketplaces as MLSs are becoming more and more I would say of a competition. As our marketplaces have expanded, so too have the footprints of MLSs, and they're bumping into each other. And so we got to get comfortable with this. And in fact, it's a good thing in my opinion, because cooperation is definitely necessary, but competition paired up with that allows us to get to that co-opetition practice that seems to work so well from my perspective in the day-to-day environment for real estate agents and brokerages. We need to embrace this as organized real estate as well. So status quo, probably need to step that one aside. We're seeing a lot of activity about, okay, well, regionalization can occur not just at an organizational scale, but as we pointed out, if we can create, greater connectivity and we can fulfill marketplace needs at a regional scale by sharing data while retaining some of the local decision making, I think there's some opportunities there. And that relates also to lockbox reciprocity. Those pieces are there, lots of pros and cons around this, and we're seeing more related to that. You can join in existing MLSs. There's that absorption that we talked about. That's really been the primary regionalization activities have been occurring over the last 4 years, 5 years. Or you can get to creating a new regionalized MLS. And I can think we're going to see a lot more activities here. A lot of this is oriented towards MLS, by the way. We're seeing that same activity in association capacity. Some of the motivations are different there. And frankly, for me, I'm less concerned about the number of associations than I am MLSs, because the associations are and should be primarily oriented to being trade organizations, fulfilling their advocacy, their professionalism, and even their collaboration work in the marketplace. They don't necessarily have the same impact that MLSs that aren't regionalized have on the consumer and the marketplace itself. So we have a heavy focus here, but I think we'll see more activity on associations as well, is because, like we pointed out, those 170 combined statistical areas, we think that community is changing. And so long as the association is still attached to the community, it doesn't just have to be one singular town, especially when 15 to 20% of economic activity is occurring between communities that are interconnected. So associations likely have the same opportunity to reflect their communities here and the needs of those that they serve from a trade standpoint as well. Process overview wise, we can get into the details. We're happy to talk about, but the first step is that evaluation. Start evaluating yourself, looking at your neighbors, potential partners, whether it's collaboration or consolidation. Look at the landscape, do a market environment assessment, and then start getting to some conversations and starting to look at what is your decision making around this. And then start to begin those formal conversations. And we say formal, it doesn't have to be something where there's 12 people in a room. It could be 4 to 5 people from, each entity just sitting down and sharing a beverage and talking about the what ifs and the together we're better type of thing that Liz outlined. But once you get beyond that, you really got to get to building those relationships and trust, formalizing and documenting what your vision is, and then ultimately the implementation. And that's somewhere where we can help and be of assistance. So as you're looking at, assessing or beginning some of those initial conversations, we're doing work to help facilitate collaboratives and mastermind, so that some of those initial conversations are a little more directed and focused rather than just off the cuff. We're happy to visit with you. If you scan the QR code here, we can set up a 15-minute free consultation with myself and Liz. We can talk about the technical considerations. Liz is adept at that. We can talk about the strategic and those things, which, I kind of tend to spend my time there more so. But thank you for listening today. We believe regionalization is absolutely crucial. Reach out to either Liz or I if you have questions. We're happy to share our time with you if it's for the betterment of the industry. That's largely what we do on a day in and day out capacity. So whole lots of stuff there, Liz.
A whole lot of really good stuff. And I think that I would probably just close with saying, today, think about taking a step back and looking at the folks that are around you and see who might be a good partner, and take that initial first step and reach out and make that connection. And, if you can be better together, that's great. And if you can find some ways to collaborate, even better.
Yeah. And I think, again, that mindset going in of say, hey, we're interested in some regionalization conversations. It just takes down everybody's immediate, insecurity or fear or phobia or job loss, money loss, control loss, all those things, and saying, hey, how can we fulfill our regionalism charges better, whether that's at an association scale from the advocacy, the professionalism, or if it's truly connecting markets that are already connected at a socioeconomic level, but maybe not as well connected at a marketplace level for real estate. We think that's really important, and small but big things. Thanks, everybody, for your time. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for making me get a jacket on. I saw you had a jacket, so then I had to put one on. So if we look overly formal, it's Liz's fault.
You're welcome.
Y'all.